This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 208 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Today's episode is about local trips, and specifically a local trip to Meckering in Western Australia. It's not far from here. I'm here in Perth, and it's less than a 2-hour drive, and we're headed there tomorrow. So I'm recording this, just the day before, and we're going to get some more recording while we're up there as well. I'm going with my son. And maybe up's not right. Out there. Mostly just east, tiny bit north. Anyway, we are heading to Meckering for a couple of just kind of random reasons. It came about because I had some Airbnb credit that I had to use, and it was about to expire. And of course, our borders here in Western Australia are closed, so we are only able to travel within Western Australia. And so I sat my son down and said, all right, you decide. Where are we going to go? And he didn't want to go south. We've been south many times. He didn't want to go north because we're going there next month. So he headed east on the map. And he didn't want to go too far either because he's not a mad, keen fan of long car trips. Put him in an aeroplane across the whole world, he's fine. But in a car for a few hours, and he doesn't like that so much. So that way he landed on a farm stay near Meckering. Meckering's the kind of town that most of the time you wouldn't know about, but for anyone who grew up in Western Australia, you pretty much know it because it's famous or well known because of the Meckering earthquake. Now, that earthquake happened in 1968, so it's nearly a decade before even I was born, and yet I have always associated Meckering with the earthquake, and lots of people do. Having said that, there's really nothing to do there. It's just a tiny place. And I have found that telling people about this kind of local trip is kind of like a personality test to see what kind of traveller they are. So I'll tell some people what we're doing and they'll say, oh, why? But, there's nothing to do. And then I'll tell other people and they'll be like, oh, it's so exciting. Oh, you never know what you can find in a place like that. It's so fun to just go somewhere just because. And that's kind of my approach to travel as well. So it's been really interesting. But nonetheless, it's definitely going to be fun because it's nice just to get out of the city and have a couple of days doing something different. So I'm really looking forward to it. But before we go, I decided that I would find out a bit more about people's experiences of the Meckering earthquake because I knew that it was felt here in Perth as well. So I asked around and a few listeners told me their stories, and I'm going to record them here and then we can see what else we learn once we're actually in Meckering. So first up, I heard from Jane, and Jane said, I was 3 years old and we lived on the river. Mum grabbed me and ran outside to see the Swan River looking like a rough ocean with big waves, which would be amazing because our Swan River here, it goes right into the middle of the city centre and it's pretty calm most of the time, so that's crazy. Now, Leslie wrote, I was 8 years old and we'd been in Australia as English migrants only a matter of weeks. We were renting a dilapidated old house in East Fremantle, and all of a sudden the house shook and the TV began a jittering dance across the wooden floor. My parents just shrugged and assumed a large truck had driven by outside. It was only later when they watched the news we realised it was an earthquake. So it can't have been quite as bad as I'm imagining it, if you could just explain it away as a large truck. Lois told me I was an adult. I think it was a long weekend because we were down on the south coast at Nornalup at our holiday cottage. We heard a roar that sounded like a loud truck. There's that truck again. We discussed what it might have been and joked that perhaps it was an earthquake. Got back to Perth and heard the news. So there we go. They were a bit further away, so that makes sense that it wasn't quite as strong down there. And lastly, Margaret said to me, I was 13 and living in Perth and just remember the house and everything in it shaking, pictures falling off walls and mantelpieces. We all raced outside and the ground was still moving underfoot. Scary. It does sound scary. I've only been in an earthquake a couple of times, just very small earthquakes in Japan, both times in Japan, although about kind of 15 years apart. both times quite terrifying, I found, because perhaps with lack of experience and lack of knowledge here, because, we really don't usually have them, then I didn't know what to expect. I remember in both cases thinking, well, how long does it go for? Will it keep going? What happens from here? Will it get worse? It all seemed so unknown. So, having put our little trip into context, I'm going to sign off for now. And when we are in Meckering, my son and I are going to come on and describe a bit about what we've been up to and what we think about taking local trips. See you then. So today, right now, we are huddled under a doona in our farm stay in Meckering, aren't we?
Yep.
And we have had a pretty awesome day, right?
Yes, we have.
And we started off in Perth, and I wanted to just remind us of a few things we want to look up later. I think that's the cool thing about travelling somewhere local is you actually discover stuff that you don't know. Can you remember some of the stuff we saw that we want to look up more about later?
So we saw in 2 different fields, some of the hay bales were squares, but some were circles.
Yes. Why? This is the question.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer, so we're going to ask someone. So the other thing that we found was that we drove past 3 different prisons, and we need to know more about prisons now, don't we?
Or it could have been 2.
Why is that?
So there was one when we were driving towards Northam, and it was like Acacia Prison.
Mm-hmm.
And then just like 500 metres up the road, it was something or other prison farm.
Oh, yes, the Wooroloo Prison Farm. Oh, you think they might be connected?
Yeah.
Oh, that might make sense too. Well, we need to do some Googling when we get home, don't we? So we need to find that out. So we headed east out of Perth. One place we went past that I didn't even know still existed was El Caballo. Because when I was a kid, El Caballo Blanco was this, I don't know, I don't think I ever went. It was kind of a day out and they had horses that did tricks. That's my summary of it. But now there's like a resort there, remember?
Yep.
And then we drove through Northam, which was
we did.
Your first time there.
Yep.
And then the most important part of the day was we got to
Meckering.
Yes. Now, why is Meckering famous to Western Australians?
Because Australia's second biggest earthquake
took place here. Do you remember when?
1968.
Yes. And we went into the funny big camera museum, which has like the shape of a lens as the doorway and looks like a camera. But it's also got a really good earthquake display there.
Yes.
What did we learn there? Tell me what you remember the most that was interesting.
So the earthquake was 6.9
on the Richter scale?
And that you could feel it from all the way from Perth. Many buildings in Meckering were completely flattened. Although you think there would be a few deaths, there were no deaths, and the worst injury was a broken collarbone.
It was pretty amazing, really. It was kind of miraculous. Do you remember that guy in the museum explained why there was probably no deaths or why fewer people got injured?
Oh, yeah. It was the Queen's birthday public holiday.
Mm-hmm.
And so pretty much everyone was... It was 10:59 when it hit, and pretty much no one was at home.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone was like, the farmers were in the middle of their fields, and
the kids weren't at school.
Yeah.
So it was a lucky time to hit, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was pretty amazing. And do you remember what else got damaged in the earthquake?
The railroad leading straight past Meckering was severely damaged and bent pretty much all over the place.
We saw a bit of it, didn't we? There's kind of a memorialised part of it in the middle of the town.
Middle of the town? I wouldn't really call it a town.
Okay, in the middle of, the centre of Meckering. But the railway is like, it was pushed into like a fully squiggly kind of line. It's amazing, isn't it?
It is.
What nature can do. So, pretty crazy. So, we then came up here to our farm stay up on the hill. And what do you think about staying on a farm?
It's really cool.
What do you like the best?
The view.
Can you describe the view?
So we're in our little cabin, and if we just open the blinds, we can see all the way like a few kilometres into distant farmlands and stuff.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
We just watched sunset and it was spectacular, wasn't it?
Yeah, it really was.
It was beautiful. So we're very lucky. So that's so far our mini break in Meckering.
Yep. How long did it take for us to drive up here?
Oh, good question. I know when we left, the GPS said it would take an hour 45, and we stopped once or twice.
So basically
2 hours-ish.
2 hours.
Yeah, so 2 hours. And we keep saying up because it feels up because we went up through the hills, but actually we went directly east pretty much. So I look forward to seeing more of the farm and the views tomorrow.
Yes.
So now it's the next day. We are at home. My son is actually in bed and I'm not far off it because it's been a tiring weekend and a bit, but an awesome one. So I'm finishing up this podcast episode and really I've been reflecting on just how amazing it is. You can spend just 24 hours away and it really feels like it's been a week. So more on my kind of thoughtful thoughts in a second, but let me summarise what we ended up doing after waking up on the farm near Meckering today. So I was crazy enough to get up to enjoy the sunrise because I always think, I don't see it often at home, but if I'm out somewhere, especially somewhere scenic, well, I want to make the most of it. And so I actually ignored my first alarm, but then happened to wake up, just in time. So I thought, okay, it's a sign I'm meant to get up. It was freezing cold though, but it was beautiful, a nearly clear sky with lots of pretty clouds and just the most beautiful colours. So I encourage you, get up for sunrise if you can. It's worth it. Today's sunrise, just so you know, it was at 5:40 a.m. So it was a little bit early, but worth it. So we got up, I went back to bed after I came back from sunrise, and eventually we got up, had some breakfast on the porch of our cabin, looking out over the fields of wheat and looking out over, vast areas of farmland, some low hills, just beautiful. We went for a big walk around the farm. We couldn't find the sheep this morning. Where did the sheep go? It's still a mystery. And we saw the farmer and forgot to ask her. So this is going to be forever a mystery to us. But the sheep had a lot of area to roam in. So perhaps they've just chosen somewhere else. And eventually we packed up and headed home back to Perth. But this time we took a different route. I always like to take a different route, but I thought that my son might say, no, I want to get home. But I gave him the suggestion, and it was only about 15, 20 minutes extra. And he's like, yeah, let's do that. So we did. We went not the main highway, but kind of a side route. There was more bush, more trees, more kind of hidden spots. And we even went past some silos with amazing artwork. I know there's a big kind of project of painted silos, huge silos, in Western Australia, and I must learn more because I'd like to see more after stumbling across that one. Anyway, what I wanted to share, because I'm all about thoughtful travel, is some of the things that I've been thinking about this trip. I mean, it's interesting because these kind of, semi-spontaneous, really short local trips are something I didn't do enough of pre-COVID. To be fair, we also used to spend a lot of weekends down visiting my dad, who was living south, a couple of hours south of Perth, or nearly, and he's recently moved up to Perth, so that's also been deleted from our kind of weekends away. So combo of that and COVID, to be fair. But because we can't go further than Western Australia, it is really lovely to be able to it's like that whole, constraints breed creativity thing. These constraints have bred new options and ideas for us in terms of travel. So that was part of the first thought, is you don't have to go far. And for me, to feel like I've been somewhere new or been somewhere different and left home, it's about space, like having big space. I was explaining this theory I'd read about to my son actually while we were at the farm, about how having big views makes us feel really good, the savannah theory. So it's all about back in caveman days, if we were on the savannah on a plane, then we could easily see any predators coming towards us. We could see if we could see for miles, we could see that we weren't under threat. And so that kind of idea is this savannah theory. And that made us feel kind of happy and comfortable when we were cavemen, is the idea. And so now if we are somewhere where the view is vast, that gives us this kind of happy and comfortable feeling. So I think that makes a lot of sense because I do just always feel so, I don't know, just happy, blissful when I can see for miles. And the views were beautiful. So that was, an important part of being out of the city, I think. I mean, we spent hours in the evening and then the following morning just wandering and exploring the farm, but also lots of time just sitting in our cabin or on the porch enjoying the big view. So very special. I'm sure I'm not alone in enjoying this kind of view. Now, my second thought was that 10-year-olds, or perhaps my 10-year-old specifically, but perhaps in general, it's a perfect travel age. So he has plenty of energy for long walks. He probably has more energy than me, really, if we kept going. He's also become very useful. So I just had a beautiful moment this morning. I asked him to pack the car before we left. We're about to leave the farm. And by the time I cleaned my teeth, I kind of realised that he'd made several trips out to the car and it was all packed. I was like, yes! So all this time I've been doing all this work and I didn't need to because he will do all of it if asked. So that was a very useful thing to learn. I guess at 10, he's not a teenager yet, so he's not embarrassed to be seen with his mum yet. And I do find that being away together like this is just a great time to reconnect away from the Xbox, away from friends, and, just to have some mum and son time. It was really very special, and I know we both enjoyed it. Now, the final thing I was thinking about, and I know this all along, and I kind of prefaced it in the beginning of this podcast, but it was totally reinforced by our trip, is you don't have to go somewhere famous and fancy. It doesn't have to be a bucket list place. It doesn't have to have sightseeing hotspots or anything. It's just about being somewhere different and new to you and looking for the interesting parts. I really, that whole saying about how, boring people get bored. Is that the right way? You know what I mean? Basically, the idea is if you're curious, and I know that most thoughtful travellers are very curious people, then you can find something interesting everywhere. For us, in Meckering, one of the most, intriguing parts was the whole earthquake side of its history. It was just fascinating. Here in Western Australia, we don't have much in the way of earthquake history, and just to see all the pictures about it, to read about it, to see where it happened, to see that that skewed railway line. There's also a piece of pipeline that had been incredibly damaged. It's just hard to imagine the earthquakes, how powerful they are. And in our farm stay in the cabin, there was a folder of like photocopied articles and book chapters all about like the seismic activity of the area and, more details about the earthquake and the recovery after the earthquake. And I mean, when it was back in 1968. So it was interesting to see, the costs and how they dealt with tourists coming up from Perth to see the damage. And they managed to actually raise a lot of money from the tourists, so that was quite helpful. And then at some stage they kind of semi-banned them from coming because they were getting in the way of the rebuild and so on. So, I mean, that was just, just fascinating and quite eye-opening because I had no idea, and it's, actually really close to home. But in that same folder there was fascinating local history things, like they had a list of the awards given out in the Meckering school about 100 years ago. Got a big giggle out of some of them as well. So just things like that. I don't know, it's I'm sure many of you can relate. It's all about looking for the details that interest you, and especially when you're traveling with someone, having someone to chat to about those, I think makes a big difference as well. So to summarise, that was our special little local trip, and I hope that in these COVID times you are also able to take some local trips and get as much out of them as we did, because it's quite rewarding, I must say. This was a very low cost, low budget trip, and yet it feels just as fun as going somewhere more distant and more different. Obviously, I'm still keen to go to the more distant and more different places in the future, but it is, really good to reinforce that it can feel like travelling even when you don't do that. So, That's all I've got to say for episode 208 of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. Thank you for listening to my ramblings, and I hope you enjoyed hearing from my son again. He hasn't been on for a while. Now, there are no particular links in the show notes today, but I will post a few photos from our Meckering experience. So you can see the show notes at notaballerina.com/208. And of course, don't forget our Facebook group for Thoughtful Travellers, because we always have the best conversations there. And you can find that just by searching for Thoughtful Travellers in Facebook, or by checking the link in the show notes as well. So until next time, I hope that it's been interesting to hear about our little trip. I'm going to head off to bed soon because I'm kind of exhausted from that trip, but exhausted in a very happy way. So as always, thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.